Hello, my name's Henry Jackman. I'm a film composer, and we're here to talk about the music for King Kong and various other musical endeavors.
Henry, thank you so much for sitting down with me tonight. I'm such a huge fan of your music, so it's just a great pleasure. So to start out, let's go back to the beginning. I'd love to know kind of what got you into film music, what got you into music, and then film music. What kind of set you on the path to become a composer? I remember we talked a while back, and you had some inspirations.
I've probably forgotten.
But I know I'd love to revisit that. What was the kind of general genesis of it all?
Oh, well, way back. Well, funnily enough, if I rewind far enough, film music, I arrived at really, really late. I actually had an incredibly formal and sort of frightfully posh musical schooling. When I was 8, I went to English boarding school. Imagine Harry Potter, but instead of magic, it was cathedral choir music, which is a bit less glamorous than flying around.
So every British composer I've ever interviewed has come through the choir boy kind of.
Well, Harry goes to millions
David
like that.
Buckley.
Yeah. John Powell didn't. Hans didn't. But
did Dom? I forget if Dom did.
No, but you're right though. It's just well, the cathedral choir thing's a really strong tradition. In fact, me and Harry and I had the same choir master, John Scott. Late John Scott is a complete genius. He's a big influence. But so the point being, I'm sort of shipped off and I'm singing in St Paul's Cathedral, which is basically the second largest cathedral in Western Europe. Singing liturgical and religious music for 2 or 3 hours every day, so it's incredibly formal, incredibly strict, very classical. And it's quite an odd experience because basically at the age of 8 you're already part of something where you need to be the best sort of thing. Not that I was person, but the choir. It's a bit like being in the London Symphony Orchestra or something like that. You can't really mess around. But when you're 8 you don't know that, so you just think that's normal. So in fact it was a very abnormal school to go to, but you wouldn't know that because there I am. There was only 38 boys in the school, and the 38 boys in the school were the trebles for the choir for St Paul's Cathedral Choir School. So I knew no different. We even stayed on Christmas Day singing in the cathedral, and I just thought that was normal. So I had a very classical education. Same thing, I got a music scholarship to go to some sort of other posh English school called Eton, and it was all heading in a very, very formal classical sort of tradition. My father was a composer, my uncle was in the King's Singers, and then conducted like the Royal something choir, and I always forget which one, the Royal Philharmonic Choir. Heavily involved in choral stuff.
It's fully surrounding you.
The younger brother was a recording engineer. If you look him up, you'll see credits for sort of Michael Jackson, Paul McCartney, Prince, all kinds.
Wow.
So there's music all over the place. My grandfather as well played, he was a really good saxophonist and flautist, and he played with all kinds, including the Beatles, believe it or not.
Wow.
And so it was all very classical, and then I think, where did it go quote unquote wrong? Somewhere around about 17, a friend showed up with an 8-bit sampler, a little home computer, and the whole rave thing kicked off in England, and I just the vicar's son gone wrong. I just derailed completely from classical and was going to these, hiding under the M25 tunnels, doing all-night raves, and suddenly discovering this whole other thing that kind of went, which I'd never been brought up. I was like, wow, what's this?
Yeah,
this isn't, Scriabin or completely. All these Bach chorales. So that was a kind of a bit of a mix-up in the system. I think my mother was a bit disappointed. Dad, who, to be fair, was very classically trained, but to his credit, had a number 3 hit in Spain called The Flower Pot Man, and was part of a psychedelic band called Sin, which later became Yes.
Wow.
Was in no position to complain. Yeah. Because I had the photos of him and Chris Squire looking a little the worse for wear.
Yeah.
So he was super liberal anyway.
Yeah.
My dad would sometimes summon me as a kid from upstairs, and he'd have the score of Bartok's Miraculous Mandarin, and I'd have to follow the score with him while he was listening to the radio. But equally, the next day, he might be going, "No, you got to come check out this bass line in Grace in like You Can Call Me Al, or some Boy in the Bubble." So he was super eclectic. So I'm slightly excited. Whilst it was really classical, Dad was always really eclectic with music. So then I got into all this sort of rave stuff and drum and bass and whatnot, and then I kind of slithered off into the record industry for a bit. It was too cool for school, didn't want anyone to know. I could play Brahms Rhapsodies and all this stuff. Like hid all that. Was lucky enough to hang out with Trevor Horn for a little while.
Trevor's great.
Had a whole sort of mini career in pop music, and I don't know why. I think I was just sort of hiding from classical music a little bit at that point.
Right.
And then I bumped into Hans. I'd done this album called Transfiguration that was my pitiful attempt to sort of emulate the kind of thing Bjork was doing on Vespertine.
Yeah.
So it's sort of posh.
Yeah.
You have a vocal, but it's also got choir and electronica, and it's pretty upmarket business, you know. And Hans got to hear this and went, who did this? And they somehow got hold of me and said, well, come and have a chat. So we spoke for ages. He said, why are you doing what you should be doing? With your background, you probably knew more chords and harmonies when you were like 9 years old than most people do. And for some reason, it was like a light bulb went off. I'd been so extreme. It was either I'd done classical music, or then I was making these like white label drum and bass, or I was working with the Trevor Horn or whatever. For some reason, in my head, film music was something done by old people. Yeah. So I imagined a sort of a very... the elder statesman like Jerry Goldsmith or John Williams. I just didn't think it was. I was kind of too cool for school, you know.
So did Hans? Really
and Hans is like, oh, you idiot, you know. what are you doing? And records aren't going anywhere, mate. You know, you need to get involved in the film. And it's amazing that you said that, because towards the end of working in the record industry, I always used to get frustrated. It's like, God, it's so annoying that this thing's 3 minutes 45 seconds. Right. And it's always verse, bridge, chorus, verse 2, bridge, chorus, bit of an outro, a bit of a middle eight and an outro. It's like, and when I look back on it, I was always trying to like sneak in a bit of orchestra, or like try and do something to get out of the prison. I mean, that's unfair because you get amazing pop music and everything. But you could see, looking back on it, I could see I was a bit frustrated with it. And then Hans said, well, why don't you just hang out like a fly on the wall and just sort of see how, you know, music gets done to films. And it was just the beginning of a whole new path. Yeah, it was a bit like, oh,
of course.
Yes, now instead of I remember I used to have these phone calls to my agent when I worked in the record industry, moaning about, I'm educated in music from like Thomas Tallis through to bloody Scriabin. I never get to do any of this shit. And then suddenly I stopped moaning. Yeah. Because film music is like, this is awesome. Film music, you can do anything from something really minimal and electronic to you might be called upon to bust out some Renaissance, harmony. Yeah, you might be called upon to know a little bit about Debussy or Wagner or something. Could be, it's all. There's no room for moaning in film music because almost anything and everything might be useful and might be what is needed. I missed out the getting thrown out of all the institutions I was.
Well, I remember you told me a story. How you found like a VHS tape of Predator?
Oh God, yeah.
And that's how
Well, that was the beginning of me realizing that the institution I was in was a bit too snobby. Yeah. Which is no surprise given that it was Eton. Yeah. We sneaked. I sneaked down to this TV room we weren't supposed to be in, and we had this crappy it had been copied 3 times. You can imagine that VHS to VHS, right? And as I was watching, all the other guys like, oh yeah, this is an awesome film, and you see all the infrared, and I was kind of into the movie, but I kept hearing na 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 na, and figuring out the harmony, going, wow, this is sort of octatonic. This is borderline interesting, sort of like mid. It sounds a bit like Scriabin and Debussy meets. Like, this is actual music. This isn't shit. This is proper. Yeah. For some reason, I'd always switched off for music. Of course, everyone knows that all the John Williams stuff. Right. For some reason, I'd never, I had my classical studies and I had my piano lessons, but if you watch a movie, that's just like something else. Yeah. You don't think about it. And I started listening to this stuff, and I found I can, with all the education we had and everything, we had to listen to a Bach chorale, and you'd follow all the harmony. And I was sort of struggling, going, hang on, there's some quite neat stuff going on in there. Of course, they wouldn't let me rewind it. So I remember thinking, I've got to check out, and the old credits rolled up. So that Alan Silvestri dude, he's going somewhere. That's so funny. I met him many, many years later and told him that story.
Because you got to follow him with Captain America.
Yeah. Oh, he's great. Yeah. But my next piano lesson, where again I'd completely failed to do any practice and couldn't get from one end to the other of whatever Beethoven sonata I'd supposed to have learned. I said to him, I don't know whether you can get film music as piano reductions, but I just watched a movie that had really good music. I'm not claiming it's quite up there with, but it's. And it was sort of tossed aside as a meaningless suggestion. I remember thinking, you're wrong.
So you moved out here, moved to Los Angeles.
Yeah, but not funnily enough. When I first moved over here, I was working with Seal. I was actually still working in the record industry.
Right. So when did you kind of bunker down with Hans and start kind of getting in that additional music role?
Let's see, maybe 2006, 7, something like that.
So when you started doing that and kind of, you start getting your hands dirty a little bit and started working. I mean, but you already you had the kind of training and knowledge of it. You weren't like fresh out of college.
No,
right?
But I'd had a very different. I mean, there's a lot of kind of coming up through the ranks within, say, a Hans camp. Whereas I was a bit of an outsider because I'd had this whole career in the record industry.
Yeah.
And all this classical music. But actually, what I didn't know a lot about was the actual bric-a-brac mechanics and the reality of writing music to picture.
Right. And a lot of people have come up through that ranks in a similar way, and would you say that that's probably the best way to learn it? Like,
oh god, yeah.
So
I mean, I could literally feel my brain turning. Yeah. I was so used to working on records that when something was to picture, the first thing that happens to people who work in the record industry is everything's in 4/4. or no, actually, it's not so much that. It's more that the music is self-justifying, and the most important thing is working on the piece of music. And then you work to picture, you go, oh, well, hold on, the story's moved on. It's like, well, I know, but I'm in the middle of doing my thing with the music. So, well, no, that's not how it works. Story is God, picture is God. You got to know. Oh, okay. So, and there's a whole lot more flexibility.
Right.
In learning that, even didn't Schoenberg go down in flames because and he wasn't a bad composer, but to picture, it's a whole different thing. So you can think you're the most musically educated person in the world, which I didn't necessarily think I was, but that means nothing until you get picture up and learn how to tell a story. That's what, more than anything, I learned from Hans. In fact, I remember him saying, we were waffling on in this long, rambling, interesting, sort of very PBS conversation about life, the universe and everything.
Yeah.
About music. And then he suddenly threw out, of course, the thing about film is it's nothing to do with music. It's got absolutely nothing to do with music. I was like, what's that supposed to mean? Look, no, I don't care how good you are at music. The most important thing in film is can you tell a story?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And at the point he said that, I was too green to understand what he meant.
Right.
And then later I was like, yes, very good advice.
It's telling
best advice.
Yeah,
best advice.
When you first started out, you came from these two kind of opposite ends of kind of electronic music and pop music, and then orchestra and classical. Did you have kind of as a young composer, do you have kind of an identity crisis of what is my sound? What is Henry Jackman music going to sound like? Or did you kind of just...
Funnily enough, not really, because the crisis was actually earlier. Meaning because when I worked in the record industry, none of the more symphonic and grander and harmonically more discursive music was ever needed.
Yeah.
The fact that I was suddenly in a musical environment where many and all of these things could happen.
Right.
I ceased to feel an identity crisis almost the minute I started doing film music, because I haven't really obsessed about a sort of particular sound, because I was so happy. It's a bit like going, if you're a guy who's a screwdriver and a spanner and hammer and nails and a power drill and a something or other, but all they ever ask you to do is use the hammer, and then you go onto this gig where they go, hey, listen, we're going to need a drill. You're like, I'm in.
Yeah.
And this is fantastic, because funnily enough, I've got a screwdriver. I've got loads of them, and so I'm happy. I think if it's the sort of movies I've done, I'm just as happy on Big Hero 6 as something like Man on a Ledge or King Kong versus, I don't know. I mean, I've just done Birth of a Nation's a million miles away from.
But that's another thing. It's unique because you do have a versatile kind of filmography. And I know a lot of composers that I've interviewed talk about how easy it is to get typecast in this industry. How it's easy to be like, oh, you're the comedy guy, you're the horror guy, you're the action guy. Right. But you seem to find a balance between animation, PG-13 action, R-rated drama. I mean, is that
some of it's luck?
Effort? Is it luck or effort?
I think some of it is luck, but some of it is that you do need to be able to do it. Meaning it's not one of those things where I'm sort of screaming at the agent and I'm desperately trying to do something and I'm coming out of a comfort zone and it's killing me to try and learn how to do this new thing. It is literally genuinely as comfortable if someone... I remember on this really obscure art film I did called Henry IV, it was all very Thomas Tallis.
Yeah.
And that was just completely natural because it's all in my bloodstream.
Right.
And it's just as natural doing something like Man on a Ledge or Captain America or something. It's pretty much all in the bloodstream. Just because I think I just got really lucky on the mix of what went in. Thanks to my dad, my uncle, the musical education, Trevor. It's actually all been at some point shoved into the system. So So it's maybe slightly less impressive than it sounds because it is all quite natural. I haven't had. It's not like, oh my god, electronics. Yeah. How does that work? I've never had an experience that I'm going to have to really push to try and figure out how this works. It's sort of in there. You know, I used to bop up and down till 4 a.m. doing all sorts of things that will remain not on camera. You know, and equally I played it in orchestras. So it is the sort of the luck part of it, I guess, comes in when the phone rings and you find yourself on Kick-Ass and then you find yourself on Puss in Boots, and if you're lucky enough in the early part of your career to do sort of 3 or 4 where it's like, oh, he's a bit difficult to typecast because Kick-Ass is nowhere near Puss in Boots, is nowhere near Man on a Ledge, and then if you're lucky you get a reputation for maybe he's the sort of guy you can call for
anything,
most kind of things, and not, oh, he's the such and such guy. You're so right though. I remember meeting a very distinguished producer who used to direct, and I think he directed Arachnophobia. And he said, I was like the spider dude after that. Like if it had bugs in it, you know, I used to get called. Right.
And I know it's frustrating for a lot of composers, and I'm not composers, but for directors and writers.
Yeah.
Like, it's like,
it's a general rule.
I want to tap into this genre. Do you have a favorite genre? Does one appeal to you?
No, because I think it's the same thing. I particularly love doing Birth of a Nation.
Yeah.
Because I want to do more of those intimate and smaller scores that don't have sound effects all the way through. But having said that, if I did a movie, say, in the genre of Birth of a Nation 5 in a row, I would so be fantasizing about, come on, give me a, something versus someone, or, give me one of those. Conversely, if it's always, back-to-back Marvel followed by Blood, which, you shouldn't complain, for God's sake. Yeah. But then the fantasy would be like, oh, I really want to do one of those. Right. It's time for another kind of little intimate, peaceful. So I think it's like anything else. If you're lucky enough to be able to do a bunch of different things, then I don't think the favourite genre would probably be the one that you're not doing at the moment. Yeah. At the time, and you're thinking about,
the grass is greener over there.
Exactly. I've even got, see that over there? There's a little piece there by a very talented artist called Lisa Swirling. Wow. It's in a box like that. There's a little fence, and there's a guy with a hose looking over it, and it just says the grass is greener.
Perfect. There you go. Yeah. You ended up working in doing scores for movies that kind of fall under this umbrella of a brand, like Disney, Marvel. And when you say that to kind of the general public, you say Marvel movie, Disney movie, I think immediately this image or sound of what it should be pops in. When you did your Marvel films and your Disney films, was it kind of conscious to kind of be like, okay, this is the higher power here, and I'm kind of fit into it?
Not really, or especially not on something like Captain America: Winter Soldier. If you listen to whatever that track, there's a track just called Winter Soldier. Yeah, it's very much right. That's very much not the sort of thing you go, hey Kevin, listen, I'm working with you. So have a listen to this and play that straight out of the gates and be like, so no, there's an element of that, meaning right. I guess it's similar to what the Russos did. The Russos really are brilliant directors who put their stamp on it, but they're not so self-consciously anarchic that they're trying to pull out of the brand. I think that's what makes them so genius. Right. It's a Marvel film, but you can also feel that it's going somewhere else.
Kind of its own thing.
Yeah, and I feel like that's what I did, especially on Winter Soldier. It's got some pretty radical stuff in there.
I think it's one of my favorite action scores of recent memory to me.
And you never know, honestly, when I played that I'd never met them. So I was like, okay, so I'm going to play this Winter Soldier suite that basically doesn't really have any orchestra. It's industrial noise. It's hideous. Yeah. It's deliberately hideous. Yeah. I mean, this poor guy's like trapped, like a sort of Kafkaesque warped RoboCop scenario, stuck inside this metallic, why would that be bassoons? Let's just do something crazy, like actually get a human voice and mangle it unrecognizably, and they're either going to love it or they're going to go, whatever that is, wow, we can never play it to Kevin, we're not putting it in the film, and start again, my friend. Wow. So I just went for it, and they were really receptive. So some of it depends on who you're working with. Yeah, I think Disney is an interesting one. Disney, I think you do get a lot of freedom. I suppose there are certain harmonic parameters, maybe. I don't even know if that's true. I mean, Big Hero 6.
Well, definitely sounds of your sound, but I feel like they, because they try to make it part of their their catalog and part of it. It has to fit.
I think it's almost subconscious. I think there's probably an element of that you don't even realise.
Exactly.
In the same way that if you were working in London for 8 weeks. And every day you were in a black cab, one of those black London taxi cabs for an hour, you'd end up, your accent would just slightly get a bit, all right, mate. Do you know what I mean? Without you even knowing.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, so there might be a little bit of like subconscious acclimatization to the scenario that you're in. I mean, that's natural.
Yeah. And speaking of, Captain America and you've done some other films that kind of follow in the footsteps of the films that kind of came before it. So sequels where you didn't originally do the first one. So Captain America, X-Men, Uncharted, Jack Reacher. I guess maybe it depends on the franchise, but are you ever... as a composer, do you shield yourself from what came before, or do you try to make it an extension of what came before it?
Well, fun enough, in all the ones I've done, there's been a real departure on the one where I've joined in.
Exactly.
You see what I mean? So when Matthew Vaughn got hold of X-Men First Class, it was like, okay, we're doing something not related to that. So it was like, okay, end of discussion. It was almost a rebirth. When the Russos got hold of Captain America, it was aesthetically so far away from the first one. Yeah. So... I don't think I've ever been on a movie in which, well, I guess in a certain sense that's self-evident in as much as if it was more of the same, I can't imagine why they would just get the guy who did the first one other than they're not available or something. But most times I've picked up something and it's gone further down the line. There's been a radical shift in the aesthetic.
Well, Uncharted was pretty interesting because
it's another example. That was a bit of a shift
because you came in after a bit of a shake-up at Naughty Dog, and Greg, who scored the first three, whatever reasons they wanted to go in a different direction, but you had to use his theme, which was interesting. So
not that often though.
Not often, but it changed a little bit too. What was it like taking, I guess, kind of getting the baton and kind of?
I quite like that. Yeah. I mean, funnily enough, I did a bit of that, sort of on myself in Captain America 2 and 3, where we just took a little bit of that Winter Soldier vocal, but now it was more symphonic, and it ended up being used in more of a thriller way, and a more it was more sophisticatedly harmonized and not stripped out all the industrial craziness.
Yeah, the third one was the Civil War is different kind of tonal.
Exactly. But I stole some stuff. If you actually, for music geeks out there, if you listen to the last 16 bars of the original Winter Soldier suite, which sounds like it's just industrial noise, there's actually a little bit of harmony in there that's stolen and then used a lot in 3 and developed a lot more.
Wow.
Without all the... all that stuff.
I think last time we talked, you said it was like a cat being castrated. Is
that going to upset you later? All the
that should be fine. I had ambiance again.
Makes it feel like angel hearts. Huh?
Yeah. So we were talking about Captain America a little bit, and when that score came out, I remember there was a very gut reaction, I think, from people going, "What the fuck is that?" Like, and kind of a negative reaction. And does that? As a composer, do you react to that? And because they were reacting to it, not seeing it in the context of the film, but
maybe the little bit. The thing is, I think the thing you have to learn is you can't win, because I'm a bit musically across the whole spectrum.
Yeah.
So you can't remember. Let me tell you a quick Aesop's fable, right?
Yes.
There's an old man, a young boy, and a donkey, right? And they've got to get to market. It's critical they get to market, and it's a long way. Yeah. So they head off on the dusty path, and the old man's on the donkey. Yeah. Why not? He's old, right? And the kid's walking. They pass through a village. The villagers are like, "Oh, come on, man! Look at this. He's 6 years old, and you're on the donkey. Look at the poor kid. He's knackered. So he feels bad. He gets off the donkey. The little kid goes on the donkey. They carry on. They go through another village. The villagers are like, "Oh, look at this! This kid is getting a cruise on this donkey. Look at your grandfather. He's like falling apart here.
Yeah.
He's gone. Back out again." They go through another village. This time, whatever, they must be animal rights activists. They're like, "Look at the donkey!
Yeah.
This poor thing is about to collapse." And so they build this ridiculous sort of pole mechanism and tie the donkey. And of course, when they cross the river, the pole breaks. They lose the donkey. Right. So my point about that is that, there are people, if for something like Puss in Boots or Wreck-It Ralph, there'll be like, "Oh, Henry Jackman, he actually knows how to write, music with chords and melody and symphonic. It's like proper music kind of thing." Meanwhile, people who are into slightly like cooler stuff, like, I don't know about that. It's a little family, right? Then you do something like Captain America: Winter Soldier, and you'll get half of people going, "Wow, this is some badass shit going on here. And then meanwhile, the people who were liking Wreck-It Ralph are like, oh, what happened here? This is horrible.
Right.
This is really nasty. So if you run around trying to please everyone, you'll end up in some horrible point in the middle.
Yeah.
That's sort of not anything in particular.
Yeah. And
I think you got to accept that you can't take everyone with you.
Absolutely.
I need a little top up here.
Okay.
How are you doing?
I can do it. I'll do another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so impressed. One sip and you were in with recognizing.
Thank you. I'll bring some bottles next time. We can do a tasting. So we're talking Captain America. We're talking electronics, and one thing that I noticed as a listener, and I'm curious to ask, just me and my ear picking up. I noticed that you kind of remove some electronic textures from the OSTs.
Sometimes,
and I'm wondering kind of what is the creative decision behind that.
Actually, it's not always it's not always the electronic stuff.
But it's certain textures, right?
Yeah. Sometimes it's often to do when you don't have picture. It's a good question.
Are you trying to kind of build a different listening experience?
Yeah, often I sometimes find that it is such a difference when you don't have picture in front of you.
Right.
That there are certain things that don't necessarily make that much sense. That's a really interesting question, actually. They're not radically different. There are a few.
Yeah, it doesn't.
There's a few where I've taken a few things. And sometimes I might regret it later. I've gone too far. But I think when I get to the CD, because there's no image, I'm often trying to figure out if there's anything cluttering up the orchestral space that isn't actually doing anything valuable. Now you're not seeing the picture.
Right.
So I try not to tinker with it too much, but there is a bit of that. We'll see what happens on King Kong.
Yeah.
I think it'll be pretty much what's in the movie. Apart from anything else, some of it is actually to do with edits, because you have a score that's 110 minutes. No one wants to listen to that, so you've got to get down to 50. So by the time you got the arrangement going, it's to do with the kind of relentlessness of everything.
Right.
That's actually, I've managed to give you a half decent answer now.
Yeah.
When you watch a movie, it's over 2 hours.
Absolutely, yeah.
Once you've condensed everything you want to present over 50 minutes, if you leave everything in all the time, you're actually not getting the spaces that you get when you watch the movie. Right. So it gets a bit relentless.
Yeah.
So you sometimes end up going, well, that's key, we're not touching that. This is a bit more interstitial and doesn't need some of the elements in it. Otherwise it gets a bit nagging over 55 minutes. Because, of course, in the movie, you have whole periods where there are no music and you refresh the experience. And it's just a different experience when you listen.
Yeah.
Listen down.
Interesting, yeah. So let's jump to your work with Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, which hilarious, stuff.
Yeah.
This is the end.
One of them ended up being a matter of presidential importance.
And the interview.
Yeah.
Both films having kind of this dark, twisted side to them, and so how do you approach scoring comedy with these movies? What was the role of the music there? Because you didn't approach it, I don't think, as a comedy.
No. I got so lucky because, without being rude, I can't. It's not. Comedy isn't necessarily a genre that lends itself to incredibly ambitious music.
But
without being rude,
I think it's one of the most difficult ones.
But I got lucky because in both cases, my job was to be as grand and pompous as humanly possible.
Right.
Which was actually great. Meaning, in This Is the End.
Yeah.
While what's happening on screen is goofy as hell. Well, not goofy, that's not the right word, but it's really funny. My pitch to set, I didn't even need to pitch them, they were already onto it. It's like, you need to do your sort of, Sanctus hominibus. The more straight, the more serious, the more you treat the apocalypse like it is the actual apocalypse, and give us some screwed up, requiem or mass, and with a dead straight face. So I actually got to write the sort of music you could never do in This Is the End. If you're doing a modern horror film, you're unlikely to be asked to do a full-on, requiem.
Right.
And it was the same thing. If you listen to the track Kim Jong-un for the interview, it's a dead straight, really, really classically put together. I mean, I remember as I was writing, going, wow, this is the sort of piece I actually could have showed my music teacher at Oxford. This is obeying every known rule of harmony and orchestration. Because the same thing, Kim Jong-un, he's being ridiculed in the film.
Right.
My Kim Jong-un theme is a dead straight, strict,
kind of
pompous as hell.
What he imagines himself
what
to be.
he thinks he ought to be played when he wakes up in the morning and struts out in with fake medals that he's awarded himself.
Yeah.
So I just got really lucky that the two comedies I've done required a dead straight face and of just fully pulling on classical, tradition.
And do you remember when all that crap went down with the interview? I mean,
I couldn't believe it.
Like, what was your reaction to that?
I could not believe it. I remember reading a BBC headline sort of a long time before it all really kicked off, in which the North Korean government had made some quite bombastic statement about there will be repercussions. I remember thinking, no, the North Korean government are always saying there's going to be repercussions.
Right.
And I remember Seth called me one day and go, okay, well, things are looking a little rough at the moment. And then before I knew what was happening, I'm reading headlines that, Obama's on the blower to Sony. And I'm like, for your listeners who don't know what the blower is, it's the telephone. It was surreal. I couldn't believe that it just sort of turned into a matter of national security, but it did. So you can't make it up.
I know, you can't. So your first film with Matthew Vaughn was Kick-Ass, and you worked, with a whole kind of cast of composers there as well. And then you kind of, for Kick-Ass 2, you worked with, your collaborating Matt Margison.
Matt, yeah.
So after kind of coming from that kind of group, whatever piecemeal effort, how did you kind of focus it into Kick-Ass 2 and kind of, I think that's where you kind of were able to, you build off what
I think, the main thing with Kick-Ass, there was a lot of cool things going on in the music, because there's a lot of needle drops and Marriage to Freezers involved, there's a lot of really cool production and whatnot. They didn't have a theme. I think that was the main thing.
Yeah.
And then Matthew got me in, and I wrote the main Kick-Ass theme. So I think that, because you can spin that in so many different ways, the main Kick-Ass theme is sort of the thing that, when you get to your sequel, that's your DNA. And it depends how you can spin it in a number of different ways. So I think it kind of made sense. Because the real struggle in Kick-Ass was to find... Because a lot of it was Matthew Vaughn. It was like, well, maybe, I don't know, it's such an anarchic film, maybe you don't, it does not supposed to have a theme. And my pitch is, I promise you it does.
Yeah.
I mean, I know all directors think every time they made a film they've reinvented the wheel. And to be fair to Matthew, he sometimes has in a textual context, but I promise you, Kick-Ass, the movie, will definitely benefit from a heroic theme, even though you've got these like Prodigy needle drops and the Doors, I can't remember what, the Kinks, what else was in there? And all the cool stuff that Marius and Elan were doing.
Yeah.
And John Murphy.
I know the big climax at the end there.
Exactly.
His Sunshine Adagio kind of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. But the theme, really attached to the main character, and that's what I move forward with on the second one, with Matt.
So and then you've done, all of Matt's films kind of since then. How is it kind of evolved your working relationship with Matt? Has it gotten easier? Has it gotten harder to get things by him?
Yeah, this is a chance for me to say something really horrible about Matthew Vaughn. No, I actually really like him. I suppose you might describe him as difficult because but I don't think.
But he has a vision.
Exactly. There's different kinds of difficulty. There's sort of unnecessary personal difficulty because someone's a sort of meaningless megalomaniac.
Right.
And there's the inevitable and necessary difficulty that comes from wanting naturally to do things in your own way, and it's not self-conscious. It just is.
Right.
And he's a huge music lover, which you can't complain about that.
Yeah.
So he's very passionate about the music, has really strong ideas. So you will end up, in these big conflicting conversations every now and then, but it's always worth it because his directorial voice is absolutely his own, and instantly know it's Matthew Vaughn. I mean, there'd be he's got a voice because you could sort of do a Matthew Vaughn piss take.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's enough there to do a pastiche.
Right.
No, I think in the end, if there's no kind of difficulty in working with a director, then that's probably not a good thing.
Yeah, if there's no friction, then what are you building, right?
Exactly. But some things do get easier. You do develop a sort of vocabulary in a language, and you start to... Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't have quite so many...
Is there more trust with the...
there's more trust. You might disagree, but you don't have to go through the interpretation confusion. When you're working on something for the first time, they might express something and go, hang on, just so... Meaning what? And then it might take you a while to go, oh, okay, I think he just means don't use the tune there.
Yeah.
But it might have come out of some huge speech that sounded very different. So you definitely get a shorthand so that you can communicate creatively.
Yeah. And this might be one, speaking of difficult directors, I do want to talk about Paul Greengrass.
Oh, yes. He is. He's good, though.
He's good. But I've heard from John, and that he's a little bit difficult to please. And what was Captain Phillips, I mean, did that test you as a composer?
Oh, definitely. I think the limits of the thing about Paul is, in a funny way, he doesn't really want a composer.
Yeah, because he's trying. I think he's trying to make he's trying to blur the line between fiction and documentary. Almost.
Yes, exactly, and that's not a criticism of him.
No, that's
because I mean, I don't know if you've seen Bloody Sunday.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Film, yeah. So if someone who's coming from there.
Right.
And because his filmmaking is thoughtful politically, and he absolutely doesn't. He eschews totally the, jingoistic UK stroke US equals good, Australia, like Somalis equal bad and or Russians, and because he's sort of politically neutral, and if you look at all of his films, there is funnily enough, it's not. I'd say Bloody Sunday, if anything, is tilted a bit against the British, but they did behave pretty badly. So anyway, my point being that in a funny way, his ideal scenario is when music is almost entirely denuded of narrative information.
Yes, yeah.
So it's you wouldn't want to do that all the time. As a composer, what that means is, if you think, if my hands here are a description of like minimal content, then you end up stretching it over this amount of time with a really small idea.
Yeah.
Well, Paul Greengrass goes from here to like the other side of the wall.
Yeah.
Meaning it's a drone, it's a pulse, it's if whatever the limits of minimalism, you thought, well, we're going to have to do something. Surely there's got to be some development. Think again.
Are you scoring that seems like almost where he would just want to take music and kind of just use it as temp almost. I mean, kind of,
but
this is to the picture to the
cut? It does. I mean, this sounds all very disparate. I don't mean it disparagingly.
No,
because it's very much
it's a different way of
exactly. But if you're naturally someone who's sort of bursting with musical ideas, it's sort of the obverse. It would be like if it was speech making, you would delete every speech Winston Churchill's ever made and deliver these strange speeches where you do a monosyllable and then wait for 30 seconds before uttering another monosyllable, and it's very effective. It's important, I think Paul's absolutely right in that respect, because in something like Captain Phillips, had the US military been portrayed over heroically, you'd miss a lot of the nuance of the filmmaking.
Yeah, and then you'd already side.
Exactly, and unless you're patriotic to the point of blindness, almost anyone watching Captain Phillips would have to have a contemporary and nuanced view of what being a pirate means and why people are pirates and why, you know what I mean?
Right.
And that's not going to work if you have baddie music over pirates and heroic music over the Navy coming to rescue Captain Phillips. So. I do enjoy his films. I mean, if you're looking for movies with a very defined, moral, stratas, he's not the one to watch. If you're looking for something nuanced and neutral and thought provoking, and that's why. I think that's why people really respect what he does.
Absolutely.
It's just that if, from a film composer point of view, if you spent your whole career doing those, you'd get very frustrated because you're just like, I've got so much to say, but I'm only allowed 2 notes.
That's probably why John kind of backed off a little bit.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. We did talk about video games a little bit. You did Uncharted 4 and Just Cause 3. When you kind of entered that space as a composer for the first time, did anything surprise you about the process?
How long it is?
Yeah, it's
well, a couple of things surprised me. Firstly, the thing about working on a movie is once you get going, once you get on the horse, it just goes diddle-dum, 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 all the way to the finishing line. There's no like, hey, let's we'll just take it easy for a month. We're not, it's a completely committed thing that has a start point and you drive to the finish, and the last 3 weeks are always absolute madness. And it took me a while to get used to a slightly more civil. Video games take a lot longer.
Yeah.
And because in the nature of the music, it's quite sweet based, and sometimes quite. And also, you have these things you have to learn about, like modular. You can't suddenly have these accelerados and rallentandos and key changes and everything. There's a few technical things that you have to figure out in order to make yourself useful, especially with a lot of the technology with stem swapping and crossfading.
I know, because you go to a different level and this will kick that cue in and then...
and it's getting more and more. I mean, they're developing these software engines that take the stems and have algorithms for knowing which stem is most matchable with, all this kind of stuff. So there's the technical stuff to think about. but it's also unusual to have this sort of ongoing. I'm so not used to. I'm trying to imagine a film like King Kong where it takes a year and 4 months, and you sort of have a little look at reel one, and it never go. Movies always drive like crazy to the finishing line. But I ended up appreciating that, and it means you can actually. That's the only reason you're able to do it, because you can actually do that kind of thing around movies.
Right. I mean, and the two games are very different. You have one open world game, which is no structure whatsoever,
right?
And then you have Uncharted 4, which almost plays out like a Indiana Jones adventure.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's probably two different.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah, you do get a slightly different musical focus. In fact, the director of the Just Cause 3, Roland, it was a slightly more abstracted. Sort of creative starting point where it's more you end up being slightly more explorative, not quite so specific,
right? So we talked at the beginning kind of how you came up the ranks with Hans and kind of learning the business, and you kind of done the same for other composers in the business. I mean, with Dom and Matt and
not quite in the same. I don't think you could compare me to Hans in that respect, but no, it's nice to.
But it's you're working with younger talent, and then
definitely.
So seeing them kind of. I've talked to them, and they definitely were like, oh, Henry definitely helped us, and we learned so much from him. And then they kind of become not students but collaborators, and you're co-composing with them. And what's that like to see somebody grow up in their career? And
it's almost a sort of it's the virtuous. It's the thing that kind of never happens. I mean, it's I don't know. I could make it sound way too virtuous and wonderful, but I mean, why not? It is. I mean, it is a sort of in the same way. I was an apprentice to someone, and there was loads of things I didn't know about. If you feel like in a smaller way you can then help other people, then it is a kind of virtuous cycle, especially with people that you respect and you know. The thing is, there are so many people who are talented musically in the world, but for one reason or another, things may not happen for them. Right. So when you yourself, being a composer, know fundamentally, not from an industry perspective, from a creative and composer perspective, that someone inherently is in possession of genuine, natural, raw talent, which is very often, and no disrespect to producers and directors, something they don't know. So very often producers will have to go look on IMDb, do we feel safe, have they done lots of movies? Right. If I'm not seeing a lot of credits, I'm a bit nervous, kind of thing. Because it's not the same as knowing, if you're a musician, you know if someone's a musician, kind of thing. Yeah. So if you do find yourself in a position to be able to help people who actually do have natural raw talent and enough psychological gumption to withstand all the other crap that goes with writing the music, then it is immensely satisfying to say to someone, I think you should consider this person or me with this person, and you're not going to get let down, and then you're completely vindicated. So, well, I know, because I know they're really good.
Yeah, that's great. So kind of looking up at your schedule coming up, and you have Kong, Skull Island.
That's right.
And I have heard that it was a kind of a tasking. You just mentioned it was a year. Was it over a year?
No. I was saying, imagine.
Imagine.
No, it wasn't the case. No, it was
over a year.
No, I was saying, imagine if movies were like video games. No, it wasn't. It wasn't. It was the usual 3-4 month thing.
So when you approach Kong, it's not out yet, but it means one of the most iconic monsters of all time, characters of all time. I mean, if you don't want to see him, he seems as a good guy sometimes, but he's not a monster. But what was the approach here? Is definitely they're kind of bringing back kind of the it looks like the big fun adventure.
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, that was an interesting one because we took a little time. The director is pretty cool, and he's very radical. Yeah. So I think we ended up in just the right place. But his opening pitch is like, okay, we just need guitars.
Just guitars?
Yeah. Now, he's a bit like Matthew Vaughan. He's like overshooting a bit, but he really wanted to impress on me that, like, please don't just do a symphonic score, right? Because it's got the 70s aspect to it. And because he's just quite an original thinker, he wanted to come straight out the gates with, like, if you think, because, you know, you've done a lot of films, you're just going to go and do your thing, and I'm not going to get involved, and you're going to do, like, a symphonic score, and that's going to be that. Yeah. That's not going to fly. So, I mean, the initial conversations, I was a little worried at first, like, so hold on, I don't think we can do a full 100-minute score all on guitars. I think I'll give him the history and then the gravitas. And so we had this great creative tension where he was like, yes, think 70s, think psychedelia, and I'm going, yeah, cool, but also think history, gravitas, symphonic music, grand theme,
right?
And I'll meet you in the middle somewhere.
Okay. So did you build like a big theme for Kong?
Yes, in order for him to understand that I wasn't ignoring him, I spent a little time on getting a guitar palette going that would make sense. Otherwise, I didn't want him to feel like I was someone who goes, yeah, very interesting, and then completely ignore it.
Right.
But all the time secreting that. But at the same time, I'm putting together a massive orchestral suite for the Kong theme, which you're going to need. So you'll hear it in the movie. There's a bit of all of the above.
Wow, awesome!
And you'll get. I was pretty happy with some. I got to see some really juicy harmony.
Yeah.
And so I kind of dragged him into a world he wasn't necessarily comfortable with grand symphonic music. And actually, I didn't mind being dragged the other way a little bit into the psychedelic guitars. But no, good luck to. You need it's the same thing we're talking about Matthew Vaughn. If upon meeting the director, it was like, oh well, you know how to do these big movies, so you just sort of go ahead and do your thing. What's that?
What's the point?
That's nothing.
Yeah.
And no, we had a great time.
Awesome. So kind of might be kind of a vague question here, but
all the better. We can get all philosophical and abstract.
Where does the first note come from? I mean, when you're looking at a movie or whatever project you're working on, and you're trying to find that first note, what are you looking at? Do you read the script? Do you look at the picture?
No, that is a really good question. I've no idea. When I'm trying to think of a few different examples, because I really...
Yeah, I'm sure it's different for every film.
Yeah, I really like the Kong theme. I'm trying to remember how it started. Kong theme started with coming up with some chords.
But was it the idea of Kong? Did you want to see the rendering of him? Like, what was...
No, you don't need to know. It's not. It's much more abstract than that.
Yeah. So it's...
I'm trying to think of different ones. I mean, sometimes I came out of a preview of Puss in Boots and just walked up to a piano and the whole Puss in Boots thing just happened immediately.
Wow.
Whereas Birth of a Nation, I was still making revisions on a napkin in a restaurant 2 weeks after thinking I'd nearly nailed the theme. It just went on and on and on, revising.
Wow.
I don't know. I think you end up... It's when you're not thinking. Something starts to reveal itself. You know it's the real thing. What I've learned over the amount of movies I've done is that you should trust... There's a point where, if you're smart, you have thoughts about a character. Like Kong. Kong would be a bad idea to go C major, F major, G major, right? But that's a external thought. Yeah. It's a thought that it's a sort of censorship, left brain type thought. It's not that you're expressing yourself. But even though that's a true statement, it's a true statement to say that would be a bad idea. But you don't get there by going, right, so if that's a bad idea, what would be a good idea? Yeah. Some sort of, more profound harmony, blah, blah, blah. And off we go. So whilst there are some sort of regulatory parameters that are probably gurgling around in your subconscious mind, which are smart.
Yeah.
So, Jack Reacher shouldn't sound like Marla, for example. Yeah. It's not going to work in the movie. So that's kind of gurgling around in the background. But then I think you know when you're onto something when you just sort of stop thinking and something starts happening. Now, maybe having got a kernel of something, you then have to get more conscious about harmonization and attacking it and working on it, because now you've got something that you can fiddle with. But the initial, like the Play-Doh to start with, just has to sort of... happen in some weird... That was incredibly vague, and I can't be much more useful than that. But then you can rationalize and worry about like the metricity of it, the grammar of the theme, the syntax, the harmony, all that stuff. Your conscious mind can come back once you're confident you've got a thing to work with.
Right. And do you know you're done yourself, or do you have to have your director or someone else tell you like, this is it, you got it, or do you need?
Sometimes I usually know, but sometimes during the film you'll sort of like modify because you zone in that one level more on a character, and you end up just adjusting or jettisoning one part and focusing in on it's not really that B part, it's this part, and then developing that. So a bit of both.
Very interesting. So when you're trying to find the kind of emotional backbone of a film, and you've made me cry several times with your music, and we're not going to get too emotional.
Please do not sue me.
Do you draw on your own life experiences when you're trying to like pinpoint a certain emotion, or do you go, I know what sad music should be. I know what.
It's neither. It's neither of those. On the one hand, it's not so biographical.
Yeah.
That you're in some sort of Freudian handover from autobiography to composition.
Right.
On the other hand, it's not so cynical that you're going, here are harmonic sequences that are guaranteed to arouse the following emotions.
Yeah.
It's back to the same thing.
Yeah.
Clearly, if you've lived any kind of life and haven't been it's in there somewhere. So there'll be an artistic urgency to when you're trying to express yourself emotionally, the experiences you've had will necessarily inform the piece you're writing, but that'll be in the gurgling area, and you won't know why you're doing it.
It's kind of an instinctual...
Yeah, but at the same time, it's not pure. We're not in the realm of, pure emotion. This is being translated through music. So, again, the rational brain can come in and you can still figure out your inversions, and it's a sort of weird little juggling act of all of the above.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've never experienced any sort of genuinely searing emotions, I'm not saying that would make it impossible to write music that moves other people, but it certainly helps to know what that feeling is.
Yeah. Do you think you're a better composer now that you've lived some time and experienced more?
Well, I hope I'm not getting worse.
But personally, do you think you have kind of a more bigger base to draw from that you
maybe I think so. I think so. I think that does count for something. You end up with a tiny bit of it's funny in film music, it actually counts for something. The amount of interviews I've heard with people like Iggy Pop or whatnot, and the speech is always the same. As they get older, it's like I can't write the songs like I used to when I was a crazy, mad, screwed up 22-year-old. And that might be true if you're on the absolute fringe of like punk or something where it's so raw that you don't even know what you're doing. You're a moment in time. You're a zeitgeist kind of thing. Whereas film music isn't quite as on the tip of some sociological pyramid like that.
Right.
So in fact, I think you do potentially get like wisdom, and the passing of time isn't necessarily a disaster for a film composer in the way it might be for as Iggy Pop was describing. He just couldn't quite write the songs like he used to.
Kind of looking at the film industry as a whole, kind of as someone who's worked in it, lived in Los Angeles, kind of experienced the business side of things, the artistic side of things. Are there any trends or things that you look at and go, oh, that's good. I'm really glad I'm seeing this. Or are there any trends that you're like, oh, this is kind of unfortunate. I wish it wasn't like this. Are there kind of any good or bad happening right now that in your
well, the good part of it is the sheer eclecticism. Really, if you think about it. I mean, maybe it's not a fair point because I wasn't as aware in the 70s or 80s as I am now. But I think you'd be pushed to argue. Surely it is the case that from 2000 to now, the musical vocabulary that is expected, encouraged, permitted, used to describe the stories we're telling in films is wider than it's ever been. Right. Surely. I mean, I know, and there was a lot of funk stuff. I'm not saying that in the 70s you might just as much hear a hi-hat as you might an orchestra. But if you look at a range of films that are not considered specialists, that your average person is totally happy to go and watch and went, oh, I just saw this film, it's great, I really enjoyed it. Yeah. Has a huge spectrum that could be anything from Johansson to Hans to some classical needle drops to Tarantino dropping tunes all over the place. To what I mean? The if it were a political party or a church, the congregation is like varied, made of many colours and creeds, and it's all good. Like everyone come in,
right?
And that's a good thing. Possibly a trend that is less favourable artistically is the inevitable financial security people feel in constantly revisiting existing franchises. But even then, see, having said that, Kevin Feige's building a thing that you could argue, but I mean, he's doing it in a way that is you don't keep seeing the same film.
Yeah.
It's quite a phenomenal thing he's doing. So it would be unfair to say you should never build a universe
No, it's
but you should do it kind of like Kevin, meaning the way to do it is to think about it and make it creative and diverse. There's an understandable element, I suppose, sometimes of financial insecurity that leads to, sticking with a known franchise. But, you know, that's also a slightly unfair argument, because if you look at all the movies made in 2016, there's a hell of a lot of movies that are not.
But I also think it's just the nature of our human storytelling. We tell the same stories over and over
exactly
again. And we love to hear, you know, your father or your mother told you a bedtime story in their way.
Yeah, right.
And I probably heard it a different way.
Yeah.
So it's like interesting. I think, I mean, there's there's cash grab movies for sure, but to see, like, I don't think every reboot's necessarily a bad thing. Like,
no.
Yeah.
And, well, I mean, you know, they always say there's only a certain amount of stories.
Yeah.
Anyway, the key is how. In fact, my father used to say about composing. I can't remember who he was talking. I think I thought I was a bit of a smart ass because I realised that Handel had nicked something from Bach or vice versa. And I was like, well, they do that in Baroque music. They do that all the time. Yeah. Any old monkey can write tunes. What you do with it,
right?
You know? Which is one of the reasons I think Brahms is better than Tchaikovsky, but we won't get into that. Or John Powell give me another one of his big lectures, or whoever it was I was arguing.
My John Powell interview, we sat for 90 minutes talking about his piece, his concerto, and it was interesting. I loved it, but he was so passionate about it. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, I John Powell is right up there as far as I'm concerned. I love that piece. So anyway, I can't think, you know, given that I'm English, I'm surprised I can't think of a whole litany of negative and grumpy things to say, but I actually can't.
Well, that's good. I guess that's a good sign from an industry professional.
Yeah.
So outside of music and movies, what is kind of what do you do with your free time? What's a Henry Jackman
free time? I didn't get any in 2016. I'm trying to get more. That's part of the plan. I love disappearing. I managed to get a holiday at last, right at the end of the year, and I went to the Cook Islands.
Wow. So you like traveling?
I've been to 52 countries so far.
Wow.
Which needs to go up a little bit. I really want to go to Bhutan. I'm actually a bit of a nature freak, if I'm honest. Yeah. So when I'm not writing music, I have fantasies of getting it down to sort of pencil, notebook, sort of tie fishing pants, a t-shirt, and just no internet, and staring at skies and running around, notating how many birds I've seen.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That sounds relaxing and
refreshing.
And I guess to wrap things up, if you could choose any role on a film that's not the composer, what would you pick? If you could do anything on a movie.
I think maybe not director because of the sheer level of carnage.
Yeah.
And not producer because you're responsible for everything and just everything goes wrong and it's your problem because Robert Downey Jr. is not available for the reshoot, plus the set blew down, plus like you're running over budget and, you know, your lead actress is being a complete nightmare. It's definitely not producer. It might be cinematographer or editor. Because editor, the carnage is past and now you think you got a film, now let's see what we really got. Right, now let's making a film is actually all in the because they said actually on the end, you got to film, otherwise it doesn't exist.
But it's when it takes shape.
So maybe because it's a little more similar to composer. I don't think I'm not megalomaniac enough to believe that I know the answer to every single question. Do you know what I mean? So what about the costume? I don't know. It looks period to me. I mean, it looks kind of cool. I don't feel like I have an opinion on everyone and everything.
Right.
I feel like I have a lot of opinions about music, whereas I think as a director, you actually need a little dictatorial streak where you genuinely believe that your opinion is the one that needs to be heard on almost everything.
Yeah.
and on the few occasions where that's true, you got a really good director. Maybe cinematographer or possibly picture editor even more.
Right.
Because then you're back at the ranch with all the footage going, right, now it begins.
Do you think composers would make good screenwriters because you're kind of telling a story in a way? Do you think that would...
Well, it depends because there's no semantic... Well,
it's a different language.
It's
words
different
versus
language.
Music, but...
possibly.
Would you ever
possibly, but there's so many expositional... it's much more literal. Right. I don't mean literal as in literary, meaning you can't, the throughput that needs to work in terms of narrative has a lot more, I don't know, without sounding disparaging, like pedestrian logic that needs to make sense. That's not the same with music. You can kind of float around in a different kind of set of aesthetics, whereas with screenwriting, it has to work as in cogs and bolts. And
absolutely.
Otherwise you get found out for sort of hideous inconsistencies and characters who haven't, finished their arc. You're like, oh, damn, I forgot about that. But maybe, yeah, it's in the ballpark. I think in a funny way, picture editing might be closer.
Yeah, I think so.
Because
because you're shaping a story out of material.
Exactly.
So notes and putting them. Yeah, it's definitely a visual. It is opposite. It's sonic versus image, kind of the sound versus image.
And if I would do the sound effects and just turn them all down 16 dB.
So you don't have to fight with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Henry, thank you so much for your time tonight. Yeah, thank you. It was such a pleasure.
No, it's all good.
Thank you.